to the SAP, sorry, to...
2, 1, action.
Welcome to Innovate Now, and in today's session we'll be focusing on modernisation.
But if I think about how we're providing that information to end users within Microsoft now, it's using things like Copilot.
Very big customer in UAE, and they wanted all the good things about unified data platform, but where do they start?
Because the reality is, you don't really want to move the data at all, right? The smaller amounts of copies of data that you make, the more trust you have.
Are there any methods to streamline data ingestion?
But what we have done with Microsoft is something really good, where we have addressed that very problem of bridging the gap between your enterprise systems.
Knowing that everyone's getting the data from the same place, knowing that it's trusted, and that it's being brought, and there's governance and there's lineage and there's all those things.
Now, Velocity is a no-code solution. Just gets deployed into the customer tenant and gets your data out of systems like SAP, your BW, Oracle, SQL, all your legacy landscape and your enterprise systems into Azure.
No organization wants to move slow deliberately, right?
What happens after data lands in your, let's say, Azure? Like how is going a business tap into it?
How should businesses balance accessibility with governance? Welcome to Innovate Now. I'm your host, Kevin Little, and in today's session we'll be focusing on modernisation, so data modernisation, and a bit more around data empowerment and the results thereof. So with me in the studio today is Pete and Lalith. I wondered whether I could start with you, Pete, and just introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hi, Kevin. Good to see you again. Pete Humble from Microsoft. I'm part of our Azure Technology Specialists organisation, here to talk all things data, as it's something I've been doing for way too many years. I'm not going to say how many years, it'll give away too much, but no, look, super excited to be here again.
Perfect. Lalith?
Yeah, I'm Lalith Korae. I'm heading the data modernization practice here at Kagool. So I'm excited to be part of this discussion today.
Good. So in this session, we're going to cover off the SAP journey to Microsoft Cloud. And obviously we've started with AI, and what we're going to now focus on is how to modernize data access. So I came across an interesting conversation with a senior lead at an organization who summarized the new world within their resources, let's say corporate resources internally, their people, and he made an interesting position, or had an interesting position, which was very much focused on, clearly it was a manufacturing base, but one side of the organization was staff who are more operational, and the other side was regarded as super users, which I think is an interesting divide, even though shouldn't be a divide. It is a divide from a modernization perspective, where, as we touched on previous sessions, it's about giving access to staff to the right data, but also in allowing super users to analyze the data better and to do more with their data. So from a data modernization perspective, clearly transforming legacy systems for the future, hopefully. So really from a data governance and compliance becoming a critical concern for a lot of organizations, which we touched upon in the last session, which is very much focusing on certain data is critical and certain data isn't that critical. Pete, how should businesses balance accessibility with governance?
Good question. And I quite like that staff and super user thing. I've not thought about it that way. I guess I've always seen it as kind of consumers and I don't know what you would call the super users. Anyway, yes, so governance and compliance is a really, look, it's a super important topic. What's interesting when you say there about non-critical data, I guess my argument would be, if it's non-critical, then what you're doing with it, right? Because every data should be, it forms some value within your organization. That's why you're kind of capturing it. But I think it's about trying to understand the importance of that data and how important that data is then to deriving the outcome that you're looking for. The compliance goes without saying. The governance level, I think, then is driven by how important is that data and how is it going to be used and who's using it. And we touched on in our previous podcast about data tiering as an example. So, bronze, silver, gold standards of data, right? Gold is something people can't touch. That's just the data that's being used, whereas maybe bronze data is data that people have kind of free access to. Do you create, different use cases so that people have free access to data? That's the playground maybe, and then you have your more productionized version of data. But I think what it lends us to is different types of roles as well that are important. So you often hear people talking about data stewards, so you've got people whose role it is and responsibility is to make sure that data is compliant, and that it's governed, and that you're following all the rules and regulations, and you've got your master data. People understand what a metric is and how those metrics are calculated. You can't expect everyone in the organization to have that level of understanding. So kind of that data steward type role, who are then responsible for it, I think is one that we're definitely seeing more of as data becomes even more critical.
Cool. So many businesses are still working on legacy systems, whether you like it or not. They are, which is a good thing and a bad thing, obviously, where organizations don't necessarily want to change if it's not broken, type of thing. But Lalith, what do you think the key benefits are when moving to cloud-based systems from a modern data platform perspective?
It's interesting. I think almost all our customers who approach Kagool, they have one or other challenge, I want to call it, with their existing legacy setup. Now they have served their purpose, right? So legacy setup was really good. It has driven value, probably still giving value, right? So good old dashboards and probably the KPIs, because it's trusted, evolved over decades, and there's a lot of investment went into these legacy systems. You can't just ignore them. I think the main challenge comes when you wanted to get more out of it. I think you'll have the limitations of technology. You'll have the silos that we talked about in our previous session, where the lack of access to all the data sets and central access to the data sets, which will then allow everything else possible out of it. Things like AI, ML, or even the central governance that Pete just mentioned. How can you have that good control on your data sets if you don't have it in a single place, and having those good frameworks around it? It gets very challenging when your data is redundant and it's actually duplicated into multiple channels, and then the quality comes as another big challenge. So there's no doubts. I think cloud-based modern data platform is going to be a really good value, but we also touched upon a plan and strategy into moving it, not just like a switch. So I think there's definitely a lot of benefits, and I think the strategy and the roadmap should also map the value that's coming out of it. So yeah, I think we are seeing a lot of benefits. Customers are getting a lot of value out of their data, which is, I think it's everyone's goal, right?
So right, let's move on from a sort of a data access perspective. I know there's a lot of organizations in certain industries that are probably more focused on making sure they have cloud capabilities available. But there are other organizations who don't feel the legacy systems need to go into the cloud, as it were, especially from a manufacturing perspective, and there are legacy systems out there that focus on that. However, there's still an element where you've got to go through that process and got to hopefully streamline data ingestion. And I guess really, Pete, for you is, are there any methods to streamline data ingestion?
Yeah, no, great question. And just one thing to kind of get clarity on is, for me, there are two different types. Well, there are probably multiple, right? But for argument's sake, there are two types of modernization. You've got application modernization, where you might want to take a legacy system and bring it up to date. And then you've got the data modernization piece. And those things can work in isolation, right? You haven't necessarily got to modernize the application in order to get the data into a place where you can kind of take advantage of it. To your point, and I guess the point that Lalith made earlier, is just leave the application where it is. If it's not broke, don't try and fix it. How do you get the data though? And that's the challenge. And I think there are lots of ways that you can achieve that. And I think, again, it comes down to how is the data being used? How quickly do you need to get the data in the place it needs to be in order for it to be actionable and allow those decisions to be made? are there things that need to happen to that data whilst it's being moved from the legacy system to, the modern data platform? I think all of those questions will lead you to what's the right way for us to approach streamlining how we get that data. Because the reality is, you don't really want to move the data at all, right? The smaller amounts of copies of data that you make, the more trust you have in the data. Ideally you'd want to report off the transactional system, right? Because it's there, but we know, that doesn't give you the performance that you need. So you're going to have to move it. But that's when we see really modern type technologies around mirroring, right? So I'm not moving the data, I'm almost federating the data that I need access to. So again, lots of different ways to achieve it, but I think the best way will come depending on how you actually need to use it and how it's going to be used, to know whether it's real-time streaming, is it something you do in batch, can you do change data capture type things, so you're only moving the things that have changed. But the scary thing is how quickly technology changes, and being on top of those enhancements, I think, allows you to change based on the different needs of an ever-changing organization.
Yeah, correct. And I think when it comes to sort of data, clients have different requirements out of their data, obviously. But I've noticed over the last few years, in fact, from a Kagool perspective, these accelerators are really important, right? So, here at Kagool, we've got Velocity, we've got Spark, as ingestion tools or mechanisms, let's say, to accelerate that process. So, Lalith, how would these tools help businesses ingest data faster and more efficiently? And could you share some sort of real-world examples on the results?
Sure, yeah, like I said, I think almost all our customers want to modernize, but I think the biggest challenge or a concern they have, I have to call it that way, is how do I do that, right? And it always starts, like Pete mentioned, I don't want to move my data if I have an option, but I don't have an option because the legacy setup is not working. And what's my next option? I want to get everything in a central place where I can, one, trust the platform and do all the good things, but like you said, executing it needs moving the data. And I think Kagool as a company, we are partnered with Microsoft just to focus on that problem, I think almost 7-8 years ago. It's probably still a challenge for many customers, but what we have done with Microsoft is something really good, where we have addressed that very problem of bridging the gap between your enterprise systems and how to tap into that data, get that securely, fast, without like months and months of development into your the target systems. Now you may say, oh, I can do that myself, I've done that. There's quite a challenge that you cannot actually surface on day one. And with our experience with our customers, we have seen a lot of complex systems. One of the very a big application for enterprises is SAP. If you talk of SAP, there's SAP is good as an ERP, and the moment you wanna tap into that and get the data out of it, it gets very difficult. And there's reasons why SAP is probably making it very difficult as well. But what we have done recently and for the last 5 to 6 years is to solve that very problem. How do we get the data out of complex systems like SAP into platforms like Azure? And the result is a product called Velocity. Now Velocity is a no-code solution. Just gets deployed into the customer tenant and gets your data out of systems like SAP, your BW, Oracle, SQL, all your legacy landscape and your enterprise systems into Azure. So the best part of this is, like you mentioned, it's gonna address all those concerns they have. How is my data secure? Is it gonna take ages to get the data out? And then I think that the value that they get from using our accelerators is like immense, because they can then focus on the results rather than the plumbing, which we take care of. And another interesting thing that Pete mentioned is the changing technology, right? Let's say you don't have accelerators and the canvas that we are building, and you go ahead and build something, and probably in 2 years or 3 years time you get a better way to do that, better way to ingest. So what we do at Kagool is to give that agnostic solution, agnostic to technology, agnostic to the process, where we take care of all that complex stuff, give a very user-friendly accelerators to get the work done, and we take care of all the complex technology shift and the improvements and the best ways, the best practices and all that embedded in the tooling. Again, for systems like SAP, we also embed the functional knowledge in it. One of the elephant in the room that we didn't talk about is what happens after data lands in your, let's say, Azure. Like how is gonna business tap into it? Is it ready to consume? Most likely not if you don't actually have the functional knowledge. So that's another key thing that we have embedded into our accelerators, where our tooling not just gets the data out, not just the technical data out, it actually gives a business perspective out of it. We build the curated entities, your sales orders, your material masters, the things that business would like to see and understand, so that the data is ready to consume. Now, that data can then go into, like you mentioned, the tiered approach. We do it all the way until gold, where the data is ready for different use cases, be it reporting, be it AI ML use cases and all. And then once you have this platform, you must be then, as an owner of the platform, you're wondering, oh, I want to control this. I don't want the same old problems I faced in my previous solution. So we have built another framework called Spark. So it's basically a suite of features like data observability, data catalog, data lineage, which all complements with what platforms like Microsoft already offer, right? So we are not replacing things, we are actually accelerating things, right? So under the hood, we make use of the Microsoft tooling, Microsoft architecture, so that the plumbing and the things that needs to be done to get to your target is faster and efficient. So it's really powerful accelerators that again, with our partnership with Microsoft, it's really helpful for our customers.
I think that acceleration is key, right? No organization wants to move slow deliberately, right? Because if they see real value in the data, the sooner they can get to that outcome. So having those pre-built solutions, having the ability to simplify how you get from point A to point B, every organization is going to want to do that as quickly as possible, but to make sure that control, security, all those good things are there. You can't bypass those things, right? But if you can help people move faster, then I think acceleration is critical, and solutions that you provide, I think, are great to supporting that.
And I think going back to another podcast we've done, especially around sort of data quality, is very much focusing on the right tooling, the right people, and the right process, which probably stems back to your streamlining bit as well. So from a next step, customers clearly are excited potentially to move to the new world, let's say, to modernize. Obviously ingesting is more in the real world. How do you actually move the boxes rather than what it will look like in the future? But Pete, from an example, can you provide any examples around sort of businesses successfully moving potentially from the new world, from a BI and AI driven decision making after they've done sort of the ingesting?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting because we've used the word modernisation a couple of times, and although I think it's a great word and absolutely explains what we're trying to do, I sometimes put that in the same camp as when we talk about innovation, because to different people those things mean something very, very different, right? Depending on where you start, modernisation or innovation can be very different. However, I think this move to a more AI driven approach, and whether that's about getting insights from the data or actually it's using the AI tooling to make decisions for you, I think people are super excited about what does that mean. What I would say, we've touched on on previous podcasts about the importance of data. It doesn't fast forward getting your data right. Right? AI doesn't do that, right? Because AI is only as good as the data ultimately that you put into it. But with regards to your question and about moving from kind of BI to kind of AI, the best example for me would be Microsoft. The journey that we've been on, transforming how we use data and the importance of data within our organization, changing the culture of the organization to accept data and become a data-driven organization is massive. But if I think about when I started Microsoft, it was very much a reporting, dashboard-driven type of scenario, right? Where you went to a place and there was data and you could filter it and you could do all those things to kind of get the answer you want. But if I think about how we're providing that information to end users within Microsoft now, it's using things like Copilot, right? So Copilot is your interface into the data. You're not necessarily going to the report or the dashboard, you're opening up Copilot and you're asking Copilot the question, and not only is that giving you the answer that you might have got from the report, but it's giving you context around that as well. Here are other things that I've found that might be useful in answer to your question. So absolutely, you know, it's revolutionized the way that people are consuming the information. And it's as simple as, actually, I can get on my device now, right? I haven't got to get my laptop out or anything like that. I can ask Copilot, you know, when I'm on a journey, about what things do I need to know as I go into a customer. So it's super exciting. But it's so fast moving, right? You just don't know what's, you know, what's coming next. But I think that journey is one that many people are on. One thing often people do say to me when I talk about Microsoft as an example is, but you're Microsoft. So no wonder you've been on that journey. And I think it's a fair point, right? Not everyone can move maybe as fast as we can, but there is an exciting journey to be had. But don't forget about the importance of the data. Just because AI is there doesn't necessarily mean you're quite ready for it yet. Find the use case, you know, find the value, use the right technology to deliver the outcome that serves the best purpose.
Yeah, great focus point. I think building your data sets right, I think that's the key focus. But if you think of, from Kagool standpoint at least, a very good example there of Microsoft, but from Kagool standpoint, we have seen customers on that journey in different stages. If you think of someone new into this area of, oh, I want to use this latest technology, I've been using Excel, so I have budget, I want to get more value out of my data. They're starting new, and we as a company, we are engaging different personas, if you want to call it, of businesses. There's some business who want to get started, there's some businesses they have started and they are now trying to excel and speed up their data consumption. So one good example I can take is a very big customer in UAE who has, I think, around 10 or 15 departments. It's a huge customer, and every department has been using different solutions for their the traditional reporting. Now, as a company, they have decided, they have taken a very strategic step to actually modernize, and they wanted all the good things about unified data platform. But where do they start? Where do I start plumbing? How do I do it? So we partnered with this customer. We did a lot of engagements with the business, with the technical users, and basically we did assessment of their existing landscape. We get to know everything they're using today, all the traditional legacy systems. They have BW, they have BO, they have Tableau. If you think of it, there's multiple things used by different departments. Their goal is to have one platform and one consumption channel, let's say Power BI, right? So we work with them, we deployed our accelerators, Velocity and Spark. So today that journey is actually progressing really well. So their legacy workloads are being transitioned into the modern data platform, where our accelerators are not just understanding what's in the box, but also migrating and automating that migration. So in a way, it's helping them actually achieve their goals, because even if they want to start somewhere, they want to actually address all the departments in parallel. So you can't have, oh, you're going to wait 10 years before you see my new Power BI dashboard. But with this approach of accelerated journey, what we are seeing is a lot of quick wins across their domains, across their businesses, and everyone's adopting to this new. I think the change management was a key there, because now you are pushing your business towards a more there'll be a skill gap, there'll be new landscapes around. So I think we are helping with both executing and migrating, but also the change management, which is the key to success. Like you said, are you gonna just dump everything and give it to your new as a new solution to your business? No, it's probably not gonna work out. It involves transition, it involves training, it involves change management, good governance controls. So for this customer, I think we have done that end-to-end thing, and we have learned a lot in that experience, because there's no textbook to do that, honestly. I mean, you probably even ChatGPT or Copilot will have things that is very generic, but I would say it's very, very customized and tailor-made to each customer, that like our consultants can actually do those workshops and provide those solutions along with the Microsoft partners.
And just to pick up on, I mean, absolutely 100% agree with all that he's just said. I think what becomes then super critical there is that unified data platform that we mentioned. Because although the dream might be single unified data platform, single consumption tool. We know that's not the reality, right? We know that different users have different requirements, and there'll always be a multitude of tools. But actually that unified data platform, knowing that everyone's getting the data from the same place, knowing that it's trusted, and that it's been brought, and there's governance and there's lineage and there's all those things, that becomes the critical factor, because people might use Power BI, they might use lots of other tools just because that's what they understand. But actually knowing that everyone's getting it from that kind of single source of truth, I think is the kind of critical step in that.
Right, so let's unlock insights with Microsoft tooling. Let's start with sort of where businesses are from getting more data into their environment and obtaining insights that are as valuable as possible for decision makers. So why is tooling such a critical step in a business intelligence process, Pete?
Why is tooling so important in a no, joking. Look, it's insight to action. I've often called it, seen it called. It's to your point. If there's not a next best action, how valuable is the data? So the delivery mechanism, tooling, to your question, is obviously super critical in that. And again, I think it depends on who is the consumer, and how do they best get access to that information. We've spoken before about, if I'm someone out visiting customers, I'm in the field, and you send me a 17-page PDF document, that's not particularly helpful for the meeting that I'm about to walk into, right? So, how can I just get that number on my phone or whatever it might be? So tooling is super important, and the challenge often is, how do you simplify that tooling as much as possible, rather than having 15 different answers? Can we have one answer that's got multiple capabilities? And again, different experiences of that are, well, then it becomes a really overcomplicated tool because you're trying to jam so much stuff into it. So, what Microsoft is trying to do ultimately with Fabric and OneLake and that unified platform is trying to create as much as possible a single set of capabilities that work seamlessly together. Because ultimately Fabric is a combination of technologies, right? It's how you get the data in, it's how you store it, and then it's how you consume it. And then to your question, actually it's that consumption bit that's super important. But one answer doesn't fit all requirements. It's about understanding, who's using it and what is the decision they need to take. I remember working with a customer years and years ago, and they had this concept of the dark dashboard. And ultimately it was, I don't need all the flashing lights and the colours and stuff like that, because that's just really confusing. I almost want something that's dark, and if something flashes, then I know it's the problem. If you think about when you're driving your car, you don't have all the lights on your dashboard, right? A light comes on when there's a problem, and that's then what's prompting me to take that action. So again, it's thinking about how people consume that information and delivering something to them that makes that super fast and super simple.
Yeah, and dealing with those critical steps, because otherwise you'll just take a roundabout route getting to the same problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about that next best action, right? If it's not driving me to an action, it still might be useful information, but it's not necessarily something that I need right now delivered to my phone, right? It's something I consume when I need it. But it's about decision making, and that's the super critical data, the secret sauce that every organisation has, right? That data is their data and what allows them. How do you make that as available and as visible to people in the right tool? I mean, there's that old analogy, right? It's the right data to the right people at the right time, and I think that still stands up, because if you're not hitting all of those, then something's broken.
Yeah, correct. And I think from a Microsoft perspective, they've dealt with that well. I think
trying to
exactly. So from a Microsoft tooling perspective, clearly from a wide scale BI position, we know the tool of choice. So how do companies ensure that their dashboards are designed to create real impact? And I think Pete's touched on something, but Lalith, could you just...
No, yeah, I think that's a very good starting point for answering that question. But if you think of what we talked about so far, get your data in central place where it is accessible, it's structured, ready to consume. And the very important thing that Pete mentioned is, can I trust this data? Yes, because it's going through a very well organized framework, right? So once you have it in place, the consumption patterns, like you say, historically there's been a lot of point-to-point extracts, if you want to call it, or consumption. What we are proposing as a more standard approach, or more compared to the traditional way, is to try and reuse your data sets as much as possible. So when you think of how do I design my dashboards and reports, like Pete mentioned, who is it for and what data do they like to see, right? So you can't have a dashboard where you'll dump a simple table in there. No, that's probably not going to help. So what the way we are working with our customers is to help understand their personas, the user groups. So every user group will have different information they want to see. And the goal is to build those visuals and the dashboards, which are again tiered in a way where they have, based on the role, based on their user group, they'll be assigned to a role, and that role will define what they are able to see. Right now, if you think of it, we have this unified data platform, but we are also actually putting windows on it with different lenses, reusing the same central data platform instead of just duplicating that data into multiple channels out. So what we have seen recently is that use of latest technology and the tooling helps a lot. Like Pete said, Power BI comes with a lot of latest features like RLS and CLS, and having the data in Fabric. If you have the data in one lake, you can have one semantic model for, let's say, finance, and you may have 10 user groups of consumers of finance all tapping into the same data model but having different views of it, right? So that's the important thing, not just from the business user standpoint, but also from management standpoint. You're now reducing the footprint, you're reducing the number of copies of your data sets, and eventually it's an also a less headache for an IT or the admins who are managing the solution, right? So you don't, like I said, you don't want to end up having the same multiple reports or multiple dashboards without control. So a short answer is try to reuse the data sets, have the security layer on top of it, which is again helping to have the different lenses out. And that's probably a better way to scale your data platform and help your consumers.
Yeah, sort of focus before scaling too quickly, make sure the process is done, like you said, start small, and then recognize the people who are using that data, and then recognizing, like you said at the beginning, it doesn't matter what tool they use, there's probably best of breeds and so on and so forth, but they has to have a tooling position to get the answers to their questions that they need, whether that's a dashboard, AI, or BI, whatever.
Yep.
From a next step perspective, I guess this is the fun part. Lined up a couple of quick fire questions for both of these guys. So, Pete, if you could give just one piece of advice.
Why are you smiling already before you've even asked the question?
One piece of advice to maximize data value, or value for their data, what would it be?
Just one.
Just one.
Try to think how I could word 15 answers into one question. Look, I think if you're going to push me for one answer, I think, and we've touched on it a few times in previous sessions and in this one, I think it's aligning the business outcome with the data that you need to use. Because if you're not doing that, you're not going to get the value out of it. So if you've got to do one thing, it's what question are we trying to ask at the end, and let's build the solution that does that, because there are multiple ways that solution could be built. And we touched on governance and security, and all those things are, important things for you to consider. But ultimately, if what you deliver at the end doesn't allow someone to make a more informed decision, then none of that stuff really matters. So I think that's the one bit of advice is start with the outcome, work back from there.
Data equals value type of thing. Yeah. Cool. Great. And then Lalith, got one for you. So from the biggest mistakes you've seen in organizations out there, doesn't have to be current, maybe past, which they should avoid from a data strategy perspective, what would it be?
Yeah, again, just like Pete said, there's probably not one answer to this. There's no one mistake that you can avoid and everything's well and fine. There's probably a few failure points, if I want to call it. Again, one problem is with the technology selection. I've seen customers picking the technology, then deciding what to do. I mean, it's almost like the other way around, but we recommend. So you always start with, like again, Pete mentioned a very good point, engage the business users, understand your business strategy. So you start with your business strategy, then the data strategy, then the technology strategy. I mean, that's a sequence I would probably and then you can vouch for it. That works really well. We have seen customers doing the other way around, probably a mix of everything, where they first decide they want to do this technology, and then they decide, oh, I'm going to bring this data out. And the last thing they do is probably put this in front of a business, and they're scratching their head. This is not what I want. So yeah, if I have to pick one thing, I would probably say prioritize your strategy in this way. Start with your business strategy, then the data, then the technology will answer all those, because like Pete mentioned, technology is evolving. Right, so you will pick the right technology once you know where you want to go, and the data strategy will define how you want to get your data. Where do I start? Which system do I tap into? So on and so forth. So yeah, I think that sequencing and the road mapping is really key for a successful data transformation journey.
So I guess from our perspective, we will share details with you guys, if that's okay. But is there any items they can learn which will put them in a first step quite quickly? What would it be from let's say, a sharing material?
I mean,
which will be in the link below. Obviously.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I'd always go to the Microsoft website, right? I think it's always a great place to start. That's where we will share, all the latest and greatest information. Obviously, you would come to the Kagool podcast, right? Innovate Now would be a great place to learn. And I just think, do your research, right? I think it's just important for you to figure stuff out. But I couldn't agree more with Lalith's point about think about your business strategy first, and organizations like Kagool, like Microsoft can help you, even figure out what does that business strategy look like, and put it in terms of the data and the technology. But yeah, the world changes so fast. Don't make any assumptions about what you think about the possibilities of technology and what both of these great organizations can do to help.
Great. Lalith?
Yeah, it's just like Pete mentioned, you want to define these strategies, and Kagool partnered with Microsoft. We build a lot of accelerators. We can engage, we can understand your business requirements. We can provide your road mapping, we can give your planning sessions, and the key thing is to see the value iteratively, and we can help you with that with a combination of our accelerators and our experience. I think that matters a lot. We learned a lot. What works, what don't work. One other really valuable way to actually find out the answers is to do POCs and POVs, if you want to call it that way. And we engage with customers to do very short POCs and POVs to show those value, what the art of possible, like I said, and get answers incrementally. You can't have the final answer on day one, but get your roadmap set, and we can help you with that.
Great. So I guess from the session today that brings to an end, but I think really what we've touched upon is very much focusing on modernization, data modernization, and the fruits of that. But clearly there's some limitations that can be had if you don't ingest correctly and use accelerators and so on and so forth. So I guess from ourselves here at the studio, Pete, thank you very much. Lalith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And feel free to share this session externally or internally within your organization, and follow the link below for more information. But from here, ourselves at the Kagool studios, it's a farewell till next time.